Sustainable Development and International Relations, affiliated to the University of Sciences Po in France. And on behalf of IDRI first, I should say, so IDRI is an international think tank who contributed a lot and supported actively the design of the Paris Agreement. And clearly in the lead up to COP26 and in the preparation of the global stocktake at the specific time where we are now, we feel that we share a responsibility to contribute to take stock and analyze the effect of the Paris Agreement. And I would like also to say another welcoming words to the audience on the behalf of the DDP. So the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Network represents today more than 40 country research teams and partners all over the world who share the common methodology and objective to contribute to design long-term deep decarbonization pathways that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. I'm really happy to see also that some of the participants are part of this network, and also Marcio Almeida da Costa, that is also a member of this network. So thank you for being there. And clearly the goal of all this network and the work that is done is to inform actors on the transformations required to reach carbon neutrality and the associated conditions of feasibility. So on behalf of IDRI and DDP, thank you a lot for your presence today, and I hope that this will be a great event and that you could learn a lot about this work that we have done all together. So here's the agenda for the event today. I will directly start with a framing introduction, introducing you a bit the report and its objectives. Before to give and pass the floor to my colleagues, Emily Hozek from SLOCAT and Marcio de Almeida da Costa from the University of Rio de Janeiro to present some insight on transport, insight coming from a sectoral expert, that is Emily, and sectoral insight, and from Brazil, especially with Marcio. And then we will have a time for a panel with my colleagues, so Clarice, Daniel, Dominique, and Pratna, that I am really pleased that you can join us and to react actually to the report and also share some thoughts about the approach and the work you are doing. And of course, just to tell to everyone that we will have in the end the chance to also address some of your questions directly to the panel and to the speakers, but you can also directly during the event just share your question directly on the chat, and you can address them directly to some specific speakers if you want. And of course, they will try during the event when they are not speaking to partially reply to your questions. So let's start directly with the framing introduction that I will try to do on my own. First of all, so the event today is actually there to present you insights on the transport sector coming from this just released report that is named Climate Ambition Beyond Emission Numbers, taking stock of progress by looking inside countries and sectors. This report is available online, so you can find it easily on our website. And I also use this moment to tell you that if you are interested by let's say deep insight into what is happening in different countries, we are organizing the DDP days, so Deep Decarbonization Pathways Days, with key country presentation at the beginning of October, so in the next weeks. So you can find also information, and if you follow us on the social networks or with our newsletter, you could be informed and of course join us at this event too. So, but first, I would like to give you some elements, some observations, some element of context and motivation that explain why we have done this report. First, and I'm sorry if there is a lot of text, so please don't read it. I know it's a challenge. So I will try to explain you what it means. So clearly, first point, first observation is long-term to inform short-term. What we have noticed clearly is that the current short-term targets are not often built, consistently with a long-term objective. by mid-century. A long term that is the horizon, so 2050, that is the right horizon scientifically to try to test the consistency of a pathway with reaching carbon neutrality. So this is a first observation that the network and the work that is behind has stated. Secondly, beyond emission numbers and towards bottom-up conditionalities. Actually, our second observation is that most of the debates are always focused on aggregated emission numbers and targets. These numbers are important, but clearly, if we want to understand the transition and if we want to understand what is feasible and how to implement it, we need to look beyond these numbers and to go in depth into the, let's say, the heterogeneity of the situation. And that's why also in the report, you will find specific country-specific situations and also specificities due to the different sectors. This is needed. This is needed if we want really to understand the condition of feasibility of the transformations and then have plans that are implementable by the actors. And third observation that I would like to share with you is about the context and more precisely the climate agenda where we are now. So we all know that currently we are not on track for meeting the long-term Paris Agreement goals, and that the first official NDCs after the intended NDCs for COP26 will not be enough. But we also know that we will see next year and till the end of 2023, the first global stocktake that the Paris Agreement precise, and that we will have the next round of NDCs in 2025. So taking into account this agenda, and you will understand after, this is in this agenda that indeed we propose this report because we feel that we can share some important insight, let's say to increase the ambition and improve the organization of the global stocktake and then the ambition in the next NDCs. So the key questions and approach that we have taken in this report and that I could summarize in let's say one main question is how to effectively guide the progressive increase of ambition as organized by the cyclical process of the Paris Agreement. And the approach of the report that you could discover is to propose an illustration. This is an illustration. This is not a comprehensive analysis of all the different enablers or barriers. This is an illustration of what can be cross-cutting, bottom-up assessment of the collective progress. The second legs is that the approach of this report is also made to provide means for reflection and action towards the climate community in the lead up to COP26, and to try to inform with different examples coming from countries and sectors, how actually we could advance the climate agenda on specific topics. So now if we enter into the content of the report, this is what you could find more precisely. You could find in this report an assessment of barriers and enablers in countries and sectors that are related to the different feasibility conditions, technical, economic, political, social, institutional, through a bottom-up approach. You could also find some key insights on the domestic and sectoral discourses, on the different climate governance organization, but also processes that are ongoing in the different countries. And of course, policies and actions related to different fields. So this report actually provides 26 country analyses and specific sectoral analysis for 3 hard-to-abate sectors: transport, industry, and agriculture, forestry, and land use. And we tried also to produce, in the end, 10 key cross-cutting messages that I will not enter in right now, that you could find, of course, in the summary of the report. And I want now to thank all the coders, because in total, you can have the view of more than 70 coders that contributed to this report. and contributed to the country chapter or the sectoral chapter. And I am really, really happy that we can have today Marcio and Emily that are co-authors of this chapter, of this report, and that could share with us some interesting insight coming from Brazil and from the transport sector. And as a kind of conclusion, I would like to reinforce the role that this report could play and the role that our community could play together. So this report clearly aims at contributing to the collective learning. Two key learnings. First, a mutual learning inside countries. So what we have noticed by discussing with our colleagues in the different parts of the world is that nobody has a good strategy or comprehensive or the best integrated strategies. So everyone is looking to the others to try to better understand what could be done and what they can learn from each other. So clearly, with this report and the different analyses that I have mentioned, you can learn from other countries and see how they are organizing themselves in terms of climate processes, what are the barriers, and try to see what are the differences or commonalities, and how this could be interesting for your own activities. A second element is, of course, the mutual learning among actors. I am thinking here not only about public decision makers. I'm thinking at, of course, the private sector. I'm thinking of the civil society and the NGOs and all the different actors that needs actually to implement these plans. So the report provides some details on the condition of feasibility, and this is what we need. Having this type of description is needed for each actors to understand really what they need to do and what is their role or what could be their role in the transition. So that's what you can find in this report. And here, just we try to summarize how we see these, let's say, two contributions. One, directly with this mutual learning, it could help national processes to be further developed and national plans directly to be further developed and enable a higher ambition in upcoming NDCs and action in the real economy. But it could also, this report could also, with this collective learning, help to have a more effective global stocktake and prepare a more effective global stocktake, which in the end could lead to have a better understanding of how to work together and what could be the effective international cooperation that could support the national and sectoral transformation and enable also to raise the ambition in NDCs. And to finish before to pass the floor to Marcio and Emily, again, just to insist that this report is an illustration of the approach, and that if you are looking for a full comprehensive assessment, you will not find it. What we have asked to the co-authors is really to highlight what was, from their point of view, the key insights from the climate processes in their countries, from the key barriers in their countries. So you will not find a comprehensive assessment. And clearly, this is the goal of the global stocktake. And here, what we see is that we are just providing a first piece and showing a bit how we think this could be useful to organize conversation. But clearly, we are also calling for more efforts all together to try to cover the necessary analysis in the different countries and sectors towards the 2 next years. So thank you first for hearing me and listening to me after this 10 minutes or 15 minutes of presentation. And now I think I will you will have more, let's say, concrete insights of what it means exactly. And I will be happy to pass the floor to Emily Hozek from Slocat to present first the sectoral chapter on transport, and before to pass the floor to my colleague Marcio from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro to present also transport insight from the Brazilian analysis. So please, Emily, you can share your screen and start when you want.
Thanks, Jan. I think you need to stop sharing your screen for me to share
Okay,
mine.
let's do that.
There we go. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Jan, and thanks for having me here today. My name is Emily Hosek, and I was one of the co-authors of the transport chapter of this report, along with Jan and my colleague, Mark Mayer. And I work at the SLOCAT Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, which is a global partnership that, among many other things, helps to bring the voice of the sustainable transport movement into global climate and sustainability processes. So I'd like to begin just by underlying the urgency of the situation we are facing in transport. Whereas we're seeing a lot of progress towards decarbonization in other major sectors, emissions in transport are really going in the wrong direction. In 2019, transport was the second largest source of global CO2 emissions after the power sector, and it's the fastest growing source of emissions from fossil fuel combustion in the world. As you can see in this chart here, growth has been very linear and consistent as well, which also kind of highlights the challenges that we're facing. Road transport for both passengers and freight has been by far the largest driver of transport emissions in the past years, accounting for about 75% of overall transport emissions. There's also been a surge in aviation and shipping, as well as rising preferences for larger vehicles such as SUVs, which have also been contributing to the growth in emissions from the sector. At the same time, global ambition to reduce emissions from transport is low and insufficient. As of last month, we're seeing that only 15% of new nationally determined contributions of the Paris Agreement include specific transport emissions targets. So we really need to raise global ambition overall. And I just wanted to highlight this resource here. There's a tracker of climate strategies for transport that SLOCAT and GIZ just released if you're interested in finding out more about which countries are have set specific targets and which haven't. So I think one of the overall takeaways from this chapter is that to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement, the transport sector will need to approach absolute zero emissions by 2050. And that really is not going to be able to be achieved without true structural transformations. We're not going to be able to rely just on carbon offsets to offset emissions from aviation. We can't rely just on technological solutions. It's really going to need, we're going to need to look at different structural transformations to achieve these drastic emissions reductions. Just wanted to note that electrification, which is really currently dominating the global discourse on transport decarbonization, we've seen a lot of growth in electric vehicles in the past years. It's been quite impressive and fast, but it's still only 1% of the global vehicle stock. And we're still seeing lots of challenges with the adequate infrastructure for charging in countries. So we're still far away from this being the main part of decarbonization that we can rely on. And that's especially because transport remains the least diversified energy end use sector. And we are seeing more than 95% of energy use powered by fossil fuels in the transport sector still. And it's the sector with the lowest share of renewable energy. So even by switching to electric vehicles, we're still relying on fossil fuels to power them in most areas of the world in the short to medium term. So this chapter looked at what is it going to take to reverse these trends in rising transport emissions. I wanted to highlight just kind of three major takeaways from the chapter here. First is the need to kind of shift our approach to transport decarbonization. There has been a large focus on working to constantly increase the supply of transport without actually looking at what's causing the demand. And we're not going to get where we need to be from an emissions reduction perspective without working to reduce unnecessary travel for both passengers and freight. So, people and businesses use transport to access other goods, services, jobs, markets, etc., and not for the sake of transport itself. So we really need to look at the decisions and underlying determinants that influence this transport demand, but which are really currently not being considered within the scope of transport planning. This has implications on lots of different development areas. For example, the production and consumption of goods and services, urban and rural land use and development patterns, ensuring internet access for all and digital services, pricing and other fiscal decisions, which help determine land use decisions. These all have a very substantial impact on transport demand and behavior. So if you're familiar with the Avoid, Shift, and Improve framework to reduce transport emissions, a lot of our current strategies focus on shifting to more sustainable modes of transport or improving existing modes. But shift and improve measures aren't going to get the reductions necessary. So we really need to start focusing on ways to avoid emissions and avoid travel to begin with. Working to reduce this demand will require us to rethink the design of our cities and metropolitan areas, as well as our global supply chains. So looking at the topic of cities, we're seeing that some are starting to curb unnecessary travel by redesigning and adapting their built environment so that residents are able to access most of their daily needs, housing, employment, shopping, etc., within a limited radius where they're able to walk, bike, or use public transport to reach these services. And this idea has been popularized in Europe through the 15-minute city concept, but we're actually seeing variations of this concept being adapted in different cities around the world, maybe ones you wouldn't expect so much, like Houston, Texas. And we're also seeing this in Chengdu, China, which sort of takes on variations of this concept tailored to the specific needs and development patterns of cities. A note here is that this kind of approach requires a lot more coordination than is currently happening at the city level, and it we'll really need to see more coordination between the transport, urban and land use planning, housing, social services, economic development, et cetera, in cities to be able to achieve this sort of approach. Turning to supply chains, just to note that freight actually accounts for about 40% of overall emissions from transport. We think a lot about passenger transport, but freight's a really important piece of the emissions, and projections show that global freight emissions, global freight demand could triple by 2050. So we're still far off from technological solutions such as zero emission vessels, aircraft, and long distance trucks. So it'll be critical to find ways to sort of rework our global supply chains and reduce the unnecessary travel of goods. And this really means moving towards more local and circular production and systems that work to shorten supply chains. Promoting a less resource intensive sharing economy will be a part of this solution. And also focusing shipment and stock management strategies on ensuring efficiency by aggregating deliveries and sometimes not getting your delivery the next day. And these sort of changes can really help reduce unnecessary transport distances and also enable the use of lower carbon modes such as shorter haul electric trucks and cargo bikes in cities. The second takeaway that I wanted to highlight from the chapter, and what we can kind of already see from both of these examples, is that a really wide range of stakeholders impact travel demand and behavior, much further beyond the engineers, governments, planners, et cetera, that we traditionally see as having the largest impact on our transport systems. For example, decisions from employers, schools, retailers, medical facilities, et cetera, all impact transport demand and are therefore critical factors in its transformation. So policymakers and those leading transport decarbonization efforts we'll really need to find ways to better engage this diverse set of stakeholders in their planning and decision-making processes. And we're going to need more robust and comprehensive coordination mechanisms, not only at the local level in cities, but also at the national level, among ministries, among transport and climate and environment ministries, for example, and at the international level as well. The third and final takeaway is that financing really needs to be redirected to support the transition to zero emission transport. Two major points here. The first being kind of the obvious urgent need to end fossil fuel subsidies and money going towards supporting fossil fuel powered transport, and shifting that money towards supporting public transport and other low carbon transport modes. Since the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, G20 member countries have spent more than $3 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies. So this is a really big problem. It's also a challenge. There are obviously a lot of political and social challenges associated with ending these subsidies, which we've seen in several countries. But the key is really to have viable and affordable transport alternatives in place before cutting out subsidies. So it's a challenge, but it's something that we really need to work on at the international level. The second point is that the social and environmental costs of transport need to be better reflected in the actual price of transport. Right now, taxpayers are subsidizing many of the negative impacts of transport, such as air pollution, congestion, road crashes, etc., which are really costing society billions of dollars. And transport users are only paying a fraction of this full societal cost. So more efforts need to be made to align user fees and costs. And we're seeing this happening in some cities. It can be done using measures such as road tolls, parking fees, and congestion pricing. So these kind of solutions are really going to need to be scaled up to help cover the full sort of societal cost of these polluting forms of transport. So I'd like to just finish there. In summary, I think, we can't rely on carbon offsets to mitigate this very, it's hard to abate sector, but we're not going to be able to rely on offsets and technology alone. We need structural changes. We need to engage a much broader group of stakeholders in the transition, and finally redirect financing away from fossil fuels and towards more sustainable forms of transport. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for your presentation, and thanks a lot for these different insights. And I really invite, and I see that the link is in the chat, so to look also directly to the chapter, the transport chapter that is in the end of the report, so you can really go in depth in this first element that Emily just provided. And I pass now the floor to you, Marcio. Please, so we are really happy that you can join us. So normally you can share your screen directly, and when you are ready, you can start. So we see your screen, but in a mode that is not the.
Now yeah. I think that you can see in full screen. Okay.
Now it works. It's perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jan. I'm very glad to be here with you this morning here in Brazil. Okay. So we are going to talk about the Brazilian specific case for the transportation sector, okay? And first of all, I will talk very little about us, then we are going to see a picture of the energy use and carbon emissions in transport sector, and also part of the research we've done about prospective scenarios for transportation emissions in the future. And then we are going to talk about obstacles and barriers to climate policy and what we can do, and the 3 key messages that we think that are important, okay? As Jan had already told you, we are researchers from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, okay? And we have a transportation engineering program And our research is mainly based on sustainability, mobility, and logistics, and of course, future prospective scenarios for energy use, transportation, and the environment. We also have a non-profit technical institute that is the Sustainable Transportation Brazilian Institute, okay? And it is specifically devoted to research in sustainable mobility and logistics. I think that is very important that after this presentation, you can go to the Brazilian Green Logistics Program website. It's a program that we started 5 years ago, and we had the contribution of more than 50 companies, large companies like HP, Unilever, Dow Chemical, Coca-Cola, Ambev, Heineken. It's a very, very huge program here. More than 100 specialists and technicians that helped us to develop a program for sustainable logistics here in Brazil. Okay, and also we have many articles and papers part of this research I will show you today that is related to the future prospective scenarios for transport in Brazil. That's a picture of what we have in reality for 2019. That is the year, the most recent year that we have a constant information about the use of energy in transportation. And we see that we have something that is good, that 26% of the energy used in transport here in Brazil is biofuels. Okay, we're talking about ethanol and biodiesel. Ethanol is blended with gasoline and biodiesel blended with diesel oil. But we still have a very challenging problem is that we 42% of the energy that is used in Brazil is diesel. And think about that all the urban buses, all the trucks, all the trains, part of the ships, they use diesel, and it is very closely related to economic development, okay? And that's the picture of the evolution of greenhouse gas emissions from 1970 to 2019. And you will see that it had up 3.5 times the emission of carbon dioxide. Half of it is for passenger and another half for freight. Indeed, society and government established a lot of programs and targets trying to reduce trying to make more transportation more efficient and the use of energy, better use of energy. And you see recent a timeline from 25 to 2021 that related to that actions. But we can summarize it in 3 ways of doing it: biofuels, energy efficiency, and some kind of infrastructure improvement, okay? So what we've done is to use this information continually and to develop 2 scenarios. One of them is what we call current policy. That is what we think that is currently we can do, okay? And another one is that we call the some kind of more specific view trying to reduce carbon emissions. And what we see is that when you apply the DDS scenario, we can change somehow the modal share in freight, but we are not being able to share it in passenger. This kind of modal share in passenger, where roadway transport is more than 90% of the activity, we have it for more than 40 years here in Brazil, okay? And it's very difficult to change it. But in freight, I think that we can do that. What I say to you is that this kind of changes, it's not what we can do, but it is what we can do and what government and society agree to do, okay? Because we asked it for government, for society, for people that are involved with it. So it seems to be something possible that we can do for the future. Results of it, you see that in 2050, 53% of transportation emissions, and what we think it is necessary to do is we have to work hard on public transport qualification, and for qualification, we are not just saying that we are going to electrify buses, but also that we will have better infrastructure, better connection with other modes, and a better system for public transportation that we don't have today in Brazil. Also, improve the use of biofuels, rail expansion for freight, electrification and logistics optimization, and the bottom of it, light vehicle electrification. Okay, that's the way that the scenario is built upon. What we see as obstacles, first of all, we have a biofuel industry. We have a red it established here. And what we think that is necessary is be sure what is the strategy for biofuels. Government don't have a strategy. We don't have a policy for energy use in transportation. We don't have it here in Brazil. We have many initiatives, but they seem to be all disconnected. They are not connected, okay? And of course, it also have impact in electrification, because it's clear for us, we researched it for a long time. It's clear for us that we can start electrification by transportation modes that use diesel. That's the problem, okay? We need to put electricity in buses, in urban trucks, okay? But we don't need at that moment to put it in cars. So, but we're going to say it for people and for the society and for the government. Also, we have to work a lot trying to qualify public transport. And here in Brazil, this is the whole of cities, municipalities. We have to work with the municipalities, trying to help them to improve public transport. And infrastructure, talking about freight transport and talking about trying to change the modal share in freight. That's something that we need. Otherwise, we are not going to reduce that amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Short-term actions, are related basically to, of course, public transports, developing standard and regulations for new kinds of energy. And when we are talking about it, we are talking about electricity in transportation, road transportation, and try to capture investments, but directed to clean technology. In midterm, what we see is to somehow diversify the use of biofuels and improve energy efficiency programs. We must include, for example, high duty vehicles, okay, trucks, buses, they are not included in our energy efficiency programs. And of course, improve the use of electricity. And we have we are studying and are developing research in electric vehicle industry and the use of smart grids, and if possible, electrification of railroads, something important that we don't have here. In long term, is the acceleration of electric vehicles use and deadline and the use of combustion engine in transportation, and the surplus of biofuels. How can we use it? Because you have, we think that we have surplus of biofuels. Key messages to end the presentation. Brazil has already established some kind, okay, it's not a complete, but some kind of policy direction for the biofuels. And of course, high capacity transport infrastructure. However, we have done almost nothing about the use of electric vehicles, and we don't have the strategy where we are going to put electric vehicles. And it is not difficult. The picture of transport and energy use tell us what we have to do, but it is difficult to see. People don't see that. Biofuels face an increasingly dominant position of EV among major global players. Large infrastructure projects related to high capacity transport modes and also urban mass transit. We don't have in Brazil urban mass transit. Okay, almost all public transport, urban public transport in Brazil is done by buses. So must deal with severe and persistent economic crisis. We don't have money, and we have to choose how to fund this kind of initiatives. Over the next decades, Brazil must treat the EV market as a clear national policy to improve transport section capacity to deal with economic uncertainty and instability. Okay, 3 key messages. Thank you a lot for your attention. If you have any questions, we are here to answer, discuss, and we can contact us by mail. And I also thank George and Danielle. You know these guys, they're researchers that helped me a lot to develop this presentation and the research. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marcio, and I feel and thank you for giving a flavor. And I like the slide where you are presenting the obstacle and barriers that I think is really at the heart of what we try to do to express this and explicit really what are these barriers, and then to challenge how we can overcome them in the next period. So I take element like, I mean, due, let's say, to the overall economic recession, that is clearly a country specific, I mean, problem since more than, I mean, 2015 or more or less. the challenges about the national industry and biofuel national industry, and versus, I mean, the EV, and that is not, let's say, structurally developed, and that could be a blocking issue for the future of electric vehicles in your country, and other example, as you mentioned, on the regulation to further develop, I don't know, like rail freight and other modes. So thank you for this really insightful presentation, and now I think I will share again just my screen, and tell also to the audience and the people that are listening to us that you can share. As I said at the beginning, please do not hesitate to share in the chat some question. If you have some question about the Brazilian presentation or the presentation of Emily, so you can already share some first question on the chat. And of course, now we will start the panel discussion. And again, during the panel discussion, if you have any question that you would like to ask to some of the panelists or the speakers, so please use again the question and answer chat to ask your question. So now let's move indeed to the last part of the conversation today, and I'm really glad to have you all on board. So Clarisse Linke, the Brazilian director for the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, Daniel Bongart, the program director for transport and climate change at the German Agency for International Cooperation, Dominique Radal, the vice president for sustainable performance and transformation at the Michelin Group, and Praratna Bora, the Indian director of the Clean Air Asia initiative. So thank you all of you to being there today. And actually, what I would like to do is to kickstart the conversation by asking you your perspective first about the topic of the climate ambition. So I would ask you maybe to try to take 5 minutes each, and each of you to reply to this, let's say, first overall question on how do you or your organization actually understand or see the topic of the climate ambition, and what is your personal stocktake of climate ambition in transport? So what are the key progress made and remaining barriers according to you? So I propose to start with Clarisse, and we can just take the order that is proposed here, but it's just just to organize the conversation. So if you want to start, Clarisse, or if someone else wants to start, please.
Okay, thank you, Jan, for the invitation, and it's really a pleasure, as always, to be with so many good partners. It's great to hear from Emily on Slowcat's take about the current situation, and great to be with Professor D'Agosto as well, who has such an important work here in Brazil, and with the other colleagues as well. So, okay, so how do I, or how does ITDP understand climate ambition? I think it is a long-term goal that has to be really transformative, and that has to result in sustainable change overall. So for that, it has to be very much grounded in the triple bottom line concept. We have to talk about environmental gains, but also economic and very important social gains. And I think we still treat the social benefit too much as a co-benefit. And I think this is a challenge for all of us. We know that recent estimates show that by 2050, more than 140 million people will be affected by climate stress. And these are not people in the global north, but mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, in Latin America. So climate change is really not fair. In fact, it's going to affect mostly minorities, the poorest, the elderly, women, children. And this is something crucial for us to discuss. I think normally when we have the global discussion, we are talking about the emissions, as you said, but what we have as the forecast, I like when Archbishop Desmond Tutu said we are going to have a climate apartheid And as we learn with apartheid, it weakens society and social cohesion. So this is something we have really to take into consideration when we're talking about climate ambition. It demands a multi-sectorial shared vision, common understanding, what's really sustainable future, for who is this sustainable future, what is the sustainable future we're building and for who. I think also it has to go beyond narrative. And I mean, we know it's all about narrative, right? We saw our Brazilian president yesterday at the UN giving such a speech that has nothing to do with reality. So we have to be careful when we have, you know, the broad narrative, but it doesn't really land into reality. So what is the clear roadmap for us in each place? And I think that's what I like when we talk about a more like a bottom-up approach for the discussion on climate ambitions, right? What possible players we have on board? What is the engagements? What are the engagements of these players? Not only government, but the private sector really as the power brokers we have for such a long time. So what is their engagement? What are their takes? You know, how are they appropriating or you know, getting the environmental agenda, but not really looking at the big picture? I think this is something that is really risky when we see, you know, a sort of skewed engagement from some players, the civil society engagement as well. And we have to have shared indicators and metrics that really helps us hold all parties accountable. So I think that's how I understand the climate ambition, something that has to be broad, but has to land well in reality, and something that has to go beyond the environmental benefits and has to really take into account the social benefits and the inequality we have, in particular in the global south. I think these are my first thoughts. I don't know, maybe I can come back after.
Yeah, no, thanks. Of course, you can come back, and maybe the other reaction will make you also react. So thanks a lot for this first insights, and maybe Daniel, you would like to continue, and of course, Clarisse, you can come back in again. I mean, on this first chat on this what means climate ambition, and also react to the others. So please, Daniel, you can follow.
Yes. Thank you for the invitation to that discussion and joining in. I think that's quite interesting and very relevant. And congratulations to your report and putting this topic on the agenda. I think that's really timely and is an important contribution to the overall discussion now in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow and the Climate Week this week. And so I think that's extremely relevant. Getting to this question of what is climate ambition for me or for us at GIZ. So I think we changed a little bit over time. So when we started working on transporting climate change 12 years ago, maybe in the run up to COP15 in Copenhagen. So I think we were really quite a lot looking at what are our instruments, what can we do, can we support a successful process, and then we jumped on it and worked with our partners in the various countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, helping them to reduce emissions. But now I think we are at a stage with having the Paris Agreement and having the framework and getting much closer to 2050, that so we really have to talk about what does it really mean to decarbonize the sector? What does it mean to have net zero emissions? And I would like to link the discussion of climate ambition to that net zero discussion. So for me, there are basically three things that would really enable us in the transport sector to say, yes, we have a high ambition on climate change in the sector. So first is, I think we need to agree and we need to be familiar with an economy-wide net zero target. So I think currently, if you look at the Climate Watch tracker, about 52 countries have committed to net zero, which is already a quarter of countries. So that's a substantial contribution in line with the Paris Agreement. And so this, I think having this target really makes us all the same. Yeah. So whether we are in Germany here, or whether we are in Africa, or whether we are in Latin America, so getting to zero emissions is really a big challenge. And so we need to cooperate and learn from each other how to get there. So when it comes to the transport sector, I think it's extremely useful to operationalize that economy-wide net zero target to a transport GHG target, and make interim targets for 2030, for 2040, to make really the sector understand what it means. You have said, Jan, in the beginning that the NDCs, and so this is too high level, and we need to, but I think it's still somehow a precondition to really have in mind what the sector needs to achieve. And I'm convinced that the transport sector has to get to zero. We cannot compensate in other sectors for transport emissions. I think that has been said before. And if we look at the NDCs, Emily has mentioned the tracker for the NDCs and transport, and only 14 parties at the moment have this type of interim target in their NDC. So I think there are more, and it might be worth to look at the LTS, because the LTS really can have the overall long-term target and then link this to sectoral GHG targets. But still, that's not really, even if you have that, as we have it in Germany, so we have a net zero target, we have a long-term strategy with an interim target for the transport sector, quite challenging for us. But still, I think what's missing in Germany is a very comprehensive and specific action plan for the sector. So what is really the right mix of policy instruments that brings us there? And there's a lot of struggle around this. And it has been mentioned before, and I think especially for this part, to agree on the right pathways, on the measures and how to go there, we need to have stakeholder coordination. We need to discuss jointly how to achieve that pathways together with the industry and others. And so to end, I would like to just say, what is really the difference maybe between net zero and just an approach of reducing emissions? Yeah? So it's not incremental change, but it's systematic change. And so this really requires us to think in paradigms. And I think one example, which is the most important one, is the link to the energy sector and to renewable energies. So if we really electrify our fleets, whether in Europe, US, Asia, or wherever, we need massive additional renewable energy. And so at the moment, the energy sector might not yet be aware of this to the extent it should be aware. And at the transport sector, we can contribute to limit this additional renewable energy that is needed in through avoid and shift strategies, through having really an efficient transport system that leads us to less transport. And I think what Clarisse has mentioned with respect to all the sustainability benefits of more active transport, more public transport, mass transit, more livable cities. So this gives us quite a lot of other targets as well. So I think there's a high synergy between net zero and really limiting the renewables here. And we also need to consider the industrial transformation that is related. So quite a number of countries at the moment are based on a car industry or oil extraction, oil industry. And in that respect, this is really massive change for these countries. And this needs to be discussed with the stakeholders, what it means for them, and to avoid crisis. And I stop here, and I maybe can later link to that discussion again.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. And I think it rings a bell when I heard you about this topic. So I just shared in the chat, indeed, to agree with you about this goal and what it means exactly for transport. And I shared just an extract of the report that goes. I mean, that is exactly saying more or less what you just explained. So I feel really really aligned. So I would indeed pass the floor, maybe just to have I will change the order, Dominic, if you don't mind. I will ask Emily maybe to jump now, so it will do, Clarice, Daniel, Emily, Dominic, so we can have something that is shared. Also, gender equality is also a topic. Sorry, Paratna. I said Emily, but I thought Paratna. So if you want to then react now, please.
Sure, thank you so much. And thank you, Jan, for inviting me to this panel. And also, I think congratulations on the report. I actually read the entire report because I found it fascinating. So congratulations to the author, and great presentations, Emily and Marcio. I think it was very informative. So good day for us. The equality community, WHO just released the new guidelines, and we can see what is positive is that the short-lived climate pollutants have been taken into consideration, and there are today mention of good practices for ozone, methane, and black carbon. So I think, which actually brings me to our climate ambition in terms of Clean Air Asia. And for those of you who are not aware, Clean Air Asia works in 3 areas, sectoral areas. The first is air pollution and climate change. The second is sustainable mobility or low emissions mobility. And the third is low emissions urban development, which is kind of an integrated approach to looking at both the climate and air pollution co-benefit approach. And our climate ambition is actually to reduce air pollution, to accelerate climate action and improve health. So I think from that perspective, our focus is on reducing short-lived climate pollutants to reduce the warming of the temperature, which is essential, and also, look at the whole issue of climate ambition from the perspective of the co-benefit approach, and also looking at achieving the sustainable development goals by mitigating the climate change, climate mitigation, and as well as SLCP mitigation. So so the traditional approach is that because we primarily work in Asian cities, and most of these cities are developing cities, the approach has been to look at both the climate strategies and climate plans, and correlated with the clean air strategies and clean air plans. And as we all know, if you look at the mitigation, mobility is a major issue in terms of both air pollution as well as climate pollutants. So the approach for us in terms of a climate ambition has been to look at an integrated approach where we are not just looking at a sustainable mobility ambition. And I think Emily brought this up in her presentation, where we talked about structural transformations. And this is where probably, redesigning our cities to not just speak about, numbers in terms of mobility, but actually reducing the need for motorized transportation is probably one of the approaches that we're focusing on. So as I said in the beginning, we look at low emissions urban development, which means structural designing of the cities to contribute to positive climate action is one of the approaches that we are integrated approach that we adopt. The other area that also I think was very it came out very strong in the report is that I think the country report started with the whole issue of stakeholder engagement and building of institutional capacity. I think that's an area that needs to be a very important part of climate ambition, because if we see that the active countries, or the countries which have more structured programs which can be correlated with our sectoral targets and sectoral plans, are the ones where there is a large amount of public engagement, as well as a strong capacity to address this issue of climate action in terms of ambition. And I feel that as an organization, since our primary focus is on building capacity, I think this is a very important part that the report brings out. And I think it is where our work can align with the findings of the report. So I think there are these are the main areas in terms of how reducing air pollution so that we can accelerate climate action, building institutional capacity, and a strong public engagement in terms of achieving the climate ambition. I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot for all these elements, and I feel that indeed, I mean, I've been working actually with my colleague in India from the Institute of Ahmedabad that are a member of the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Network, and the topic about the institutional capacity and organization in a country, in a large country like in India, I mean, and not the only one, but in India is a crucial one, and that we have also analyzed in this country specific cases that we had some let's say work in silos, but as it exists in many countries also. I mean, I'm coming from France. In France, it's sometimes not better. It's sometimes also working a lot in silos. So I feel that this is indeed a very important one. And just to finish this first round, I will then pass the floor to you, Dominic. Thank you for being there, and also that this is very interesting because you are let's say the only one representative from the private sector. So you are working at the Michelin Group. So that's interesting indeed that you can share with us also what it means for you and what you how you see this topic about climate ambition from a company point of view.
Okay, with pleasure, Jan. And once again, thank you for inviting me, giving me this opportunity, and giving me the opportunity to participate into this passionate exchange and share the perspective of a company of the private sector. And I want also to pay tribute to this huge and very relevant work represented by the report, sincerely. Just to remind and to put in perspective that Michelin has been involved in transport decarbonization for years. It has been the case, for example, during the COP21. Michelin was present as the official partner of the French COP presidency. And since then, as you probably know, constantly involved through its active participation in international coalitions such as TDA or Some4All. Now it's very important, but it's not sufficient, because if you want to make the case and convince externally with impact and credibility when it comes to transport decarbonization and climate challenges, we have to show the example, at least to some extent. And so I would like to give you some concrete example of things we have led and objectives we share for coming years. So we have been working for that for a long time in different directions and areas. So starting from leading of factories towards net zero emission. So for the time being, we have reduced the CO2 emissions of our plants. So 70 sites across the world, reduced by 25% between 2010 and 2019. The CO2 emission, we have shared our objective to go further, so reducing by 50% by 2030, or compared with 2010, on the road towards carbon neutrality by 2050. And we have to say that it is also a very strong expectation of our own customers, and particularly from the vehicle manufacturers, that are more and more asking us to source our tires for the vehicles in zero emission plants. We are also developing, so beyond our scope 1 and 2, I would say, we are also developing products to have an impact on our scope 3 during the use phase of our tires, with a lower environmental impact. So the main driver is to reduce the rolling resistance of our tires, because rolling resistance of our tires is absolutely needed if you want to start, stop, and guide your vehicle. But it represents 20% of the consumption of energy of the vehicles and therefore of the emissions of the vehicle. So reducing the rolling resistance of the tires has a direct impact on the emissions of the vehicles. And we have we had objectives to reduce by 10% the rolling resistance of our tires between 2010 and 2020, things that we have reached, and we have another objective for reducing by another 10% this rolling resistance by 2030. There is also another way to contribute to the reduction of the emission of our Scope 3. It is to develop virtuous business models, such as functional economy. So functional economy is paying tire per use instead of buying tires. For example, paying per kilometer, or paying per landing for aviation, or paying per ton transporting for mining activities. So it is a way. And another example is to explore new avenues and future source of energy, alternative source of energy. And that's the reason why we created with Faurecia a JV called Symbio that will produce by 2030 200,000 hydrogen fuel cell systems for cars, vans and trucks. So these are a few examples. We have also, of course, validated science-based targets, including the reduction of upstream and downstream transportation and logistics. So when we speak of involving all the supply chain, this is an example. And also with the objective of involving all our suppliers with the objective that 70% of them by emission will themselves have science-based target by 2024. These are examples on how we work with our supply chain and we commit on science-based targets. So recently, very recently, so Michelin joined the Race to Zero commitment, and we will revise accordingly our current SBTi validated targets to officialize new objectives compatible with 1.5 degree emission reduction pathway by 2050. Now it was part of your questions on remaining barriers to be alleviated. So first, and this is very, very well explained and exposed in the report, what is needed here goes much further beyond just technology, because it requires behavior change, just like the implementation of circular economy. And we have developed within Michelin to enlarge the concept of 3 hours to 4 hours through reduce, reuse, recycle, and renew. Also when we want to implement sustainable logistic operations, it's a matter of transporting less, better, and differently. And in both cases, we recognize the avoid you are mentioning in the report, because in both cases it begins with frugality, less and reduce. But I would say that we are also needing the support of governments and policymakers, because we think they are instrumental in fostering a sustainable innovation, setting up the regulatory framework to boost innovation investments. And we have a very good example in France with the project of the Zero Emission Valley that allows to, with the support of the authorities, to implement a fleet of 1,200 hydrogen vehicles and a network of 20 stations. And this breaks the vicious circle. Few users, so poor infrastructure, so no new investment because not enough users. So this support of the government and policymakers is very important. I would also say that we need governments and policymakers to design a fair level playing field. where companies can compete with the same rules, and if possible, at regional level, and preferably at worldwide level, because our competition is global and worldwide. And perhaps 2 other words. Of course, all of us need to work in broad ecosystems. It's also well explained in the report. And I would, of course, mention the Moving On ecosystem initiated by Michelin, dedicated to sustainable mobility, that is gathering 4 key actors: government, cities, companies, and civil society, to design solutions to make mobility more accessible, safer, greener, and more efficient. And my last word on that will be that it's always important to have in mind what Clarisse was mentioning, is that the general context in which a company has to make its decision to reduce its emission is that she has also to consider not only all the other parameters of the environmental equations, that's to say its impact on land use, water, biodiversity, and for that a good tool is the deployment and use of product life cycle analysis systematically for all the offers and products. But a company has also to consider its impact on profit and planet, on profit and people. And coming back to sustainable logistic operation, when you say you have to transport less because you will have your operations, locate your operations closer to your markets, that's good for the planet, but you have to consider the social impact of that. So it's not to say that is impossible, but to make sustainable decision for sustainable reduction of the emissions, we have to consider all the 3 Ps at the same time.
Thank you, Dominique, for this last word, and indeed coming back to this, let's say, the importance of having the comprehensive picture of sustainable mobility and not only, let's say, the environmental aspect of the transition for mobility, which is really at the corner of many different goals and sustainable development goals. So thanks for concluding on this. Actually, I mean, it raises, your intervention raises a lot of questions in my mind that I would like to ask you, but I will maybe, I had let's say another question, just maybe to continue, and then we can come back, and I'm sure maybe Clarisse has also some question, or Daniel for the others, but one is maybe to continue on this. Now we have shared a bit, and I found that very interesting on different points, what means for us looking at climate ambition. What are the topics I found interesting, because we describe a bit what are some of the elements that for us are needed to be expressed or discussed. Maybe the point I would like, or the question I would like now to ask you is actually about the global stocktake that will come next year. So as you know, starting after COP26, next year will be, let's say, the starting year of the global stocktake. This is a process that will take 2 years. I mean, it will be concluded for COP 2028, so by 2023. I would like just to know from your perspective and the work you are doing currently, how this for you is a specific agenda that you would like to fit in, and maybe just to discuss regarding this global stocktake coming. How do you see the preparation, and what could be finally the role of our community? I mean, if I mean us as a climate community, and being able to provide some pieces or answer. And so I would be glad to ask you a bit. I mean, we shared a bit our views on what indeed what we feel in terms of approach, looking in depth into some conditions of feasibility, and that's what we try to start to do with this report. But I would be glad maybe that you share with us, if you have if for you the global stocktake is an important process, and that you feel you feel that you would like to participate to it, and if you have at this stage any ideas or views on potential contribution and what it means regarding your work and activities. So if you want, I could again start with you, Clarisse, to pass you the floor on this question.
Sure. Yes, I mean, I think it's, of course, a very important process, but again, we would need to be, and I think that's what I like about the approach of the report, we would need to be much more like bottom up and granular about the discussion, right? And I think normally the global ambitions, they are, they don't take too much the context of the global south that much into consideration, right? So we still see a lot of, and I think this was mentioned by Emily and by Professor D'Agosto, a lot, the electrification of private vehicles. But for example, in Brazil, we travel primarily by public transport. 86% of travel mode by the majority is by public transport, but our public transport system has been losing passengers dramatically in the last 2 years. So it is like the qualification of public transport is one of the key strategies to reduce emissions, right? And this, it has to be really taken into consideration, not only because buses are fueled by diesel, but also because this is the mode used by the majority of the low income and medium income population. But on the other hand, our systems are really collapsing. So basically, they are overcrowded, they are services precarious, it's expensive. So we are talking about the need to shift or to maintain the population in the public transport. And I think Emily talks about the ASI approach, and we understand that, and Zlokat has been leading a lot of discussions about the challenge nowadays of the application of ASI in the Global South, or how could we improve the ASI framework considering the Global South challenges. And I think in the shift sense, it is that in fact, we are already in the most sustainable modes, and how can we maintain the population in the most sustainable modes rather than wanted to migrate as soon as possible to the private vehicle, because the private vehicles are in fact part of the population's livelihood strategies. I mean, considering the walking and cycling infrastructure is simply not there, it's not safe, and that the public transport systems are really collapsing. The pandemic made it even more clear how we are not capable of having a a reasonable public transport system at this point. So the private vehicles are not only a consumption dream. In fact, it is part of many families' daily livelihood strategies. They might get into debt to get a private car, to get a motorbike. And what we know is that the electric vehicles are not really going to be the solution for the large majority of the low-income population, not even in this generation, not probably in the next generation, not probably by 2050. I mean, the poor Black change to electric vehicles, right? So another reason why the public transport, the focus on the public transport, electrification and qualification is so important for us to really be able to advance not only with the climate ambitions, but also with the social agenda. So the climate ambitions in the way that it has the environmental and social benefits of a way of integrating it. What we have in Brazil now is that we are in the 4th place in Latin America in terms of the movement towards electrification, but basically we have just pilots going on. So we have about 350 electric buses distributed in about 7 cities. But just like as in pilot projects, we still don't have public investment. What we have, it's more for exploratory phase led by the cities, and most of the time by the private sector, financing or giving funding for cities to pilot. So it's not yet like a public investment. And I think this was well described in the report as well. We don't have financial investments, we don't have basic infrastructure. So we would need to have the government much more involved to make it happen. So I think the global take, as the global stock take, right? Sorry, I lost the word, would need really to take all these particularities into account. And so it's not only about shifting a vehicle, shifting the technology, it's about shifting a whole system and about shifting the way that the population has the possibility to engage or not with these new systems. So for example, Emily also presented the ASI bit about the 10-minute city concept, right? What we know, like as an avoid strategy, but what we know, again, in the case of Latin American, but I'm speaking as like Brazilian cities, is that the 10-minute concept, although it's really an interesting concept and really sexy approach for us to take, I mean, it's very difficult for us to be able to implement it in large metropolitan cities that are extremely unequal, right? That we have social, spatial mismatches, racial inequalities as well. What is really the possibility or the result, the immediate result we see is that we're going to be creating enclaves of rich, enclaves of poor, and rather than having this 10-minute city attending the population like in a more inclusive and equitable way. So we do have a serious a problem when we look at these global approaches, so either the global stocktake or the global frameworks, and we look at the reality in each country and we say, okay, how can we really consider all the granular challenges that we have and take that into consideration so that the global picture tells us something that can be really advanced and that we see really a global roadmap. I tend nowadays not to pay attention too much about the global discussions because I think they become too superficial in terms of what is really the reality on the ground. I mean, we are part of the global discussion, but okay, the reality is really tremendously different from continent to continent, from country to country, and even inside each country, because probably Ipanema and Leblon, the rich neighborhoods in the city of Rio, they are just the same as Manhattan, right? But they are extremely different from the neighborhoods, I don't know, about 20, 30 minutes from the city center here, which are much more likely some poor neighborhoods in African cities, some poor neighborhoods in Indian cities, some poor neighborhoods, I don't know, in other Latin American cities as well. So I think this is really a barrier for us for this discussion, and something that maybe the bottom-up approach, the granular approach helps us highlight these discussions with more emphasis and with more priority.
Thanks a lot, Clarice. And I think your point is quite clear. And I think the word I will keep is indeed, I mean, the risk to have something that is not super. I mean, or the objective is indeed to try to have something that is not superficial. And I agree with you that this is a challenge in this type of top-down and global approach. And clearly we share these ideas of indeed having the national and bottom-up perspective, and even I'm saying national and maybe I should say also even more bottom-up in a way that the different actors, cities, as you said, or civil societies are able at their national level also to express what it means and also to address some granularities. But I think, and I will pass you the floor, Daniel. Indeed, I think that, I mean, we'll need you, and we'll need, I mean, in a way, the local stakeholder to be able to bring these key messages and these key insights into the global conversation. Otherwise, indeed, we risk maybe to have and that's just an overall assessment, as you said, to have a conversation that is not, I think it was you that said it before, but not landed into something that is concrete in the end, and that really helps the different, let's say, countries and actors to implement the transformations and increase their ambition finally. So yeah, please, Daniel, take the floor.
Thank you. That's a very interesting discussion now. And I think your question whether the global stocktake is important or not, I would say it depends. So if that global stocktake is superficial, is just communicated within the UNFCCC community negotiators, And so just another report, I think, so it's not really mattering. But so if the global stocktake really enables us to see whether we are on track or not, so then it can make a difference, and it can influence back national discussions, local discussions, as Clarisse has described. So I think your approach is very useful with adding the bottom-up perspective to a global top-down perspective. I would argue both is important, to have a global perspective and to understand where we are. Do we really achieve the overall joint target? And even on the national level, see once countries have LTS, they have strategies, they have subsector targets, to see whether they are on track on meeting those or not. But then in addition to report about the experiences on the ground, how it's done, how we can get to concrete action and transform the sector. So I think having these country perspective and telling stories about the countries, what they are doing, this can really add value to a global stocktake. But so we may have to, in order to make it useful, it might be helpful to have a little bit of additional structure to these country perspectives and touch the same areas or the same questions. And so 2 years ago, we have published a recommendation to our partner countries saying, if you're now revising your NDCs, make sure transport is included. And we have suggested several things. So I think I could easily build on it to make it more specific. It's just one suggestion, could be different one, but just to illustrate what could be a structure in these country bottom-up explanations. And I think one aspect is really the topic of cities and urban mobility, and it has been touched by Pratana and Clarisse already. And I think so. The national governments really have to empower the cities to face all the different aspects. It has been touched because cities are different. They start from different points. They have different challenges, but they need to be empowered with funding from national level. They have to be empowered with capacity and planners that really can help us in transforming the system. So are we somewhere with empowering cities? Do we have good practices? Do we have the bunch of cities not working on it yet? So that's one area each of the bottom-up stories from the countries should touch from my perspective. And then secondly, it's about infrastructure, I think. So do we really invest in low carbon infrastructure? Do we invest in rail, in bus systems, in maybe inland shipping in some countries it might be relevant, or coastal shipping? So do we really shift the investments from the high carbon modes to the low carbon modes? And that could be an area that could be touched. And thirdly, I have two more or three more, so I'm quick. One is, of course, the electrification question. And I would say electrification with renewables. So really link the energy sector perspective to electrification. And Dominic, you have mentioned it, so mentioned hydrogen. So if that is not green hydrogen, so then it doesn't really help us in the end. And so we need to connect with the electrification question, renewable energy question. And it's, I think it's of course important, and we need to touch that topic. And it has been touched in your report already, so I don't want to, I want to emphasize it's important. And so then one aspect also Dominic has touched this, system efficiency in freight and logistics. So freight and logistics is often overlooked and not very deeply zoomed in. It might be difficult to get the data from the private companies. And but topics like the tires and or other vehicle efficiency, but also empty running. So I've worked for a while in China, and there's so many trucks running around in the country with no load because they only bring something to one city and then they go back empty. So that's really a waste of emissions. And last but not least, the pricing question. I think that should be also touched. And it has been said by Clarisse, I think you said it might be not realistic at the moment to electrify for some, but this is maybe also the reason because we still subsidize fossil fuel mobility-based mobility. And so the price is not right yet. So we need to phase in carbon pricing and enabling the other types of transport to get more competitive to the people using it. So, and these might be elements on structuring the report. And I think partnering with SLOCAT and their global status report is, I think, maybe a very good idea. I think in the global status report, there are quite a number of country fact sheets already, and zooming in really the policies in the different areas where progress has been made that could really make a difference. So I encourage you to continue this work.
Thanks, Daniel. And I think indeed that, I mean, one of the elements that you emphasize is really that in order to have something, and I will in a way reformulate it, and you give examples. In order to compare and have a global stocktake that is useful indeed, we need to have elements or structure that is that provides some common details that we can then use as a point of comparison, and then when we really can have some interesting conversation also between us, and to try to also develop what I have said in my introduction about the international cooperation, also to insist on some key elements, and you have highlighted indeed a few 5 different areas that are quite key. I feel that this is clearly something that will need at the beginning also to be done not only and maybe to come back to Clarisse, not only on a top-down manner, but also in using, I mean, defining this framework with the people that are in the countries, and let's say more from a bottom-up perspective. And I feel that this is really something indeed, sharing a same structure with key elements, that is something we should work on, and also to have something that is, let's say, detailed enough, get the granularity that is needed, but at the same time, let's say, not too detailed in order to have to organize a conversation that could be that could be structured at the international level. Praratna, I would like to give you now the floor if you want to also react and give your views on it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Clarisse and Daniel put forward, and I just have 2 additional points. So I agree that, you know, we do need global stock taking, because global stock taking drives national policy, and national policy further drives, you know, local policy and local strategy. So I think the question of whether we have it or not is not the question, but, you know, how we do it is the question. And I think, you know, because of this report that you recently released, and also because of, you know, because we work very extensively in Asian cities and mostly developing cities, I feel that, you know, if global stock taking was also accompanied by country to country learning or knowledge sharing between countries, because if you look at the report, it does talk about the countries in terms of successful policy and programs that have worked, but I'm not sure how much on the ground we really work on, you know, successful mobility plans being shared between countries where it works. I mean, we might have an example of a European city promoting a particular type of transport, but it doesn't really reflect on a program design or how it actually began, because we have the advantage of many Asian cities which are still in the process of growth. So that's one area where there is some kind of intervention that could work. While there are already also cities which have grown, they're fully developed. And today, if you look at India, I mean, there's some figures like, 43 to 45% of Indians own bicycles, and cycling was actually a traditional mode of transportation. But we also know that 48% of India will be living in cities by 2035. So, I mean, how does one actually look at a challenge like that? Because that when you talk about, urbanization and transitioning, it's actually, you would build a city which is for motorized transport with the emphasis on electric mobility. Obviously, it would be a very car-driven city. And then you would try to bring back cycling by designing cycling lanes. So I think the challenge is how, like Clarice said, the sector expert and the global community, we discuss about, things I like the report because it talks about sectoral strategies, and then it comes down to, country-specific programs and plans. So I think it's important to continue this kind of a strategy where you look at on the one hand, policies and sectoral strategies, and at the same time, you try to translate it into what is happening within countries and in what levels countries are, so that, the comparative can be done, the sharing can be done, the knowledge sharing can be done, because there's a lot of discussion with the academic or the discussion community, but how much is it translated to the people who are actually on the ground? And I think the global stock taking, if it has some kind of a connection in terms of also building into the process, some kind of a partnership or inter-country exchange, not just from the perspective of technology transfer or finance transfer, but also knowledge sharing. I think it would go a long way in terms of the climate ambition. I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot. Very and very useful, and I also feel very aligned with what you said, and I feel that this could help indeed to build also what we would like to see happen in the 2 next years. So I think so. Thanks for this very insightful comments. Dominic, I would be interested to hear maybe also what you feel from the perspective of the company. I mean, it's that as you said, that is really involved. In these international initiatives and that knows about this also, that is linked. Has activities all over the world. How you see, and maybe this topic about the global stocktake is a bit far away from let's say the day-to-day issues for a company, but I would be glad to hear from you how what you get from that, and what you feel could be for you useful also for your own activities or for the global conversation.
Okay, so I will perhaps be less relevant on that topic than my colleagues, but so let's try. And first, I would like to quote part of the summary for decision makers of the report. Well, there is a very good news. The good news is the following. So a key impact of the Paris Agreement has been the establishment of carbon neutrality as the new reference frame of climate action, progressively turning the carbon neutrality reference into an engine for change. And non-state actors, in particular the business sector and subnational governments, are increasingly acting based on this concept. So this is a very good news, and I think we have to keep that in mind when sometimes we are just desperate because things are not as quick as we would like or needed. But just to say that I think in that action, all actors, I was referring to the forces, all actors are important. All actors have their say, and all actors have a role to play. And probably the stocktake would be the opportunity to gather the impact of all actions and all initiatives. So not only the states ones, but the ones of all the actors. And we can see that I just share with you some examples and initiatives. But if we consider all the companies and all the non-state actors, I'm sure that these initiatives are countless. And this would be a good opportunity to assess the impact of all these initiatives. And I would just mention one thing and take one example, because of something that is perhaps not in the radar today, but that is very impacting, that is shipping. And Emily shared with us the increasing impact of shipping in the emissions. So when in the transport sector analysis, the report identifies 4 key very relevant structural transformation. So mentioning aviation among others, but we are all aware that sea freight is also facing the same need for transformation. And the question is for private actors. So how can we contribute to the transformation of sea freight as a company? And perhaps two kind of actions, two level of answers. First, one level can be exploring new avenues. And an example, currently Michelin is exploring a new avenue in partnership with a company called Wizamo for developing inflatable sail to equip container ships. So that would replace fossil fuel used by huge ships. So this is a kind of answer, an illustration. And another kind of answer that would perhaps facilitate the transformation and the transition. And it's not only valid for sea freight, but as we have the responsibility to evolve from a purely profit-based selection process of our freight transport suppliers to a more profit, planet, and people balanced selection process. And this may be also the contribution we may have on a level that is not necessarily today part of the NDCs, but it is very impactful on the emissions.
Thank you, Dominic, for this insight, and I feel that actually I'm really happy that you could all join the event today, because I really found interesting the conversation we just had. I see that the time is running out. I've not seen any specific question in the chat, but I feel that it was interesting to have this opportunity to explore this already between us. Maybe I have not asked actually Emily or Marcio to also react or take part of this conversation, but please, I can just ask you, regarding the conversation we just had, if what you would keep, or if you had one or two elements you would like to add regarding this overall conversation about the global stock take and the relevant approach. So I don't know, Marcio, if you want to start, or Emily, but you can give us a word if you want.
Emily first, please. Emily, go. Ladies first. Thank you.
Sure. No, I found the conversation really interesting, and I think several speakers highlighted the challenge of sort of capturing the granularity and like the reality of what's happening on the ground, but then taking it up to the global level. And I think something that might be useful in that is looking more at the regional level and making sure that there's a lot of regional initiatives, and of course there's kind of more similarities at the regional level to really be able to compare and take stock of where areas of progress as well as challenges. So I think that's an important piece when we look at the global stock take, is to really to kind of try to capture as much reality as you can and put it together at these regional forums and initiatives. So I think that's an important part of this process. I'm not sure, I guess kind of the key takeaway for, I guess, looking at increasing ambition in the transport sector that I would just like to highlight and reiterate again is this focus on addressing demand and where where we can reduce demand as necessary. And I think Clarice brought up a really good point on this concept of a 15-minute city. There's been a lot of criticisms of it, and there's been a lot of discussions on, is this going to lead to more segregation of different areas? So I think that's really important that we use kind of a critical lens in looking at these concepts, because it's not a one size fits all approach, and we can't always look to development in Europe, to solve this global problem. So yeah, I mean, I appreciated that comment, and I think we need to look at what's realistic, and there's still ways on the ground to, I think, reduce demand, but we're going to really have to understand what the reality is as well. So that's really important to bring in those voices in this process. I'll pass it to you, Marcia.
Yeah, I let you pass the floor directly.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. I'm very happy to be with you here. So some considerations. Yeah, the main question is, when we're talking about global stocktake, what is the specific role of an individual country? Okay, what we can do as Brazil, as Brazilian citizens, as Brazilian government to help this process. And also, what we see here in Brazil, perhaps Clarice has the same vision, I don't know. What we see here is that society is not aware of the situation, okay? We developed research for a long time, and besides developing research, we are now starting to share it and try to show people in different levels, tell them what is the problem. But the main problem is that government, federal and state government, municipalities in a lower level, but I think they are not convinced that it's important, that we have to step in that direction, okay? We are facing a long-term pandemic, okay? That's it. Climate is a long-term pandemic. It's going to kill us in long term. Trying to evolve what Clarice told us before, what we're trying to show is that we have numbers here. For example, buses represent only 0.6% of the whole fleet, but they are responsible for half of the passengers' activity and 10% of energy demand when we're talking about passengers transportation. And when we say qualification, we mean that we have to improve level of service, quality, comfort, connection, energy use, okay, in bus systems. And I dare to say that if we qualify public transport in Brazil, we will attract virtually no individual travel, because we have so bad public transportation that people that is not using it is going to use, but we imagine that we are not attracting individual travels. We just do a better service for people that is already in public transportation. And also, for example, urban cargo transport represent only 1.3% of circulation fleet and about 10% of cargo activity and energy demand. They are what we can do about electrification of transport. It's the first thing, and we see that there are no strategy for that. We are trying to start discussing it with society. And the good news is we are starting a program with ICS of training people about climate change, about the importance of transportation related to that, trying to translate all the research into information that are easy for people to understand. Okay, that's it. And I would like to ask if Dominique can after send to me his contact, because Michelin is part of the Brazilian Green Logistic Program, okay? But I would like to invite them to participate more actively in the program. They are part of the program, but they are not participating. I think that we have very, very important experiences that they can share with many other companies. We have now 30 companies there, and shippers, carriers. I think Michelin has an important role in the program, and they would like you to help us in that, okay?
Okay, I will send you my mail.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Marcio and Emily, and thank you all for this interesting conversation. I feel that yeah, I will just give a last word, but not to conclude or to sum up, because we have mentioned too many information during this event. But I feel indeed that we shared some clear points on what, or some first ideas on how we would like to see the global stocktake being useful, and what are the type of analysis that could be useful. And you said just in the end, Marcio, for example, you expressed also what could be the role of research in providing some details, what could be the role of companies, what could be the role of each other in this global stocktake. I feel that this will be something that we will hear more and more in the next months, and probably a lot next year. So I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to follow up together, and potentially, and especially on the transport sector, to discuss, as Daniel said, on what do we need exactly, what is the common structure we need to use if we want to have something that is effective in the end. So I just want to thank you all for being there, to thank all the people that have joined the event, and just to tell you that this will be also online. So if you want to share it afterwards with some of your colleagues or people, so please do not hesitate. And thank you again for this great event and for your participation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Glad to be
very
with you.
much. It was great.